Lennox wiped down the squat barrel of her caliver with an oily rag, listening to the booming churn and scrape of soil passing along the hull of the Archimedex. It had been a couple of hours since they had left the Temple Turrentine assembly yards. Ratchek's voice crackled over the internal vox. "We have a request for assistance." "Who?" Lennox said, standing. "A scavenger party. Units 44 Torque and Scallion 6-1. Lennox knew Invalis Base routinely sent out teams to gather uncorrupted weaponry and equipment, but it was rare to see them this far out. "Where?" "The Ottonox Solar Collection Fields," Ratchek replied. "We're coming up on their comm signature now." "What's their problem?" Lennox muttered. She wasn't in the habit of exposing their position for scavengers too lazy to haul their finds back to Invalis Base, no matter how dangerous or essential their work was to the Omnissian faithful. "Pinned down," the Moderati told her, "by troops tagged with idents associated with Kelbor Hall himself." Lennox nodded. While she was loath to interrupt their journey back to Invalis Base, it would be much worse to have affiliated scavenger parties captured and give up its location under binary torture. "Tell them to await extraction," the Princeps said. "Confirm their position and prepare to surface." Ratchek broke ground a little distance off the comms signature. Leaving the burrowing transport, Lennox emerged into the Martian dusk, with Omnex 70 and Zarko. The three insurgents found themselves in the smashed and smoldering remnants of the Autonox fields. The vast solar array had suffered in the Civil War, with many of the revolving panels a shattered mess and the collector stations decimated. Moving up with her plasma caliver, Lennox froze at the sound of a vehicle in the sky. Crouching behind a demolished solar panel, she reached out for Omnex 70, who passed her a pair of magnoculars. As she peered up through the wreckage and into the sky, she could make out a grav craft, billowing smoke. Its interior glowed with the horrid brilliance of corruption, and its loudhailer barked scrap code-induced madness. The symbol on the side of the hull was that of the Ordo Reductor. "It's Gordakor," Lennox said to Omnex 70 and the engine seer. "Or his minions." Successes like the ones secured at Temple Turrentine had not gone unnoticed by the Dark Mechanicum. Accordingly, Kelbor Hall had charged Magos Reductor Diamond Gordakor with locating saboteurs and seditious constructs. The execution squads of the Ordo Reductor were perfectly suited to hunting down and obliterating camps of hiding loyalists. Their gathered intelligence told the Omnissian faithful that Gordakor was answerable only to Aulus Scaramanca and the Fabricator General himself. The Magos had secured successes of his own, as testified by loyal constructs recruited from the ashes of such outposts and bases. Lately, Gordakor's troops had appeared with greater regularity in the southern hemisphere and the polar regions, suggesting to the leadership of the Omnissian faithful that he was now closing in on their position. As the rebels moved through the wreckage of the fields, they took cover once again at the sound of gunfire. The grav craft was strafing the ground with the atomizing stream of an under-turret-mounted eradication beamer. As Lennox got closer, she could hear the distinctive sound of rad cleansers and see the flash of beam impacts past the shattered remains of a toppled solar collector. There, she spotted the huddled shapes of three constructs, hiding from the fighting beyond. "Find a position," Lennox told Omnex 70. The Skitarii silently obeyed, slipping off with his arquebus to find a place from which to offer covering fire. As always, the Ranger had orders not only to kill Dark Mechanicum constructs, but also to put a transuranic round through any members of the Omnissian faithful if a situation became unworkable and capture seemed likely. The resistance of the rebels offered on Mars, symbolically and actually, was bigger than any one construct, even Lennox herself. The Princeps had told Omnex 70 that she would much rather suffer his marksmanship than be taken alive into the bosom of corruption. "What by holy Mars is going on?" the Princeps hissed as she came up behind 44 Torque and Scallion 6-1. They were a couple of scavengers with a talent for spotting untainted weaponry and equipment. They had also brought back to Invalus their fair share of recruits and salvaged constructs. They had the sallow skin of forge worlders, and their overalls were filthy. Their belts were nests of tools for recovering salvage, and they carried cargo nets on their backs full of reclaimed parts, equipment, and supplies. 44 Torque looked around, startled to find two shapes behind him, but looked down at the sand in relief as he recognized Lennox and the hulking engine seer. "Are we glad to see you?" Scallion 6-1 said. Lennox ignored him. "Who's he?" she asked, pointing her caliver at the ragged figure crouched next to him. Dressed in the remains of a ribbed suit and wearing a gas-masked hood, the gaunt figure had numerals printed across his forehead. "Lank, 4 of 12, said the stranger, offering his hand. Beyond the burns on his suit, he looked fine to Lennox, certainly not tainted. "He's been with us for a few days," Scallion 6-1 said. "Indentured forge laborer. We found him while searching through Dynax Maximal. Says he was over at Icaria." Lennox had been sent over to the rebel forces holed up in the Icaria Selenium Basin. All she had found was ash and charred bodies. "We're bringing him in," Scallion 6-1 said confidently. "Well, we were."
"They almost had us," 44 Torque nodded over at the gunfire. "Thalaxi, the Order Reductor. They came out of nowhere."
Lennox lowered her head as a heavy weapons cyborg unleashed a photon thruster cannon at the gravcraft from the ground. A repulsor engine on the craft exploded, causing it to bank and crash spectacularly into the sands. "Who are they fighting?"
"This you will not believe," 44 Torque told her. "They're killing each other."
Lennox was incredulous. Infighting in Kelbor Hall's ranks? It seemed strange to the princeps. The corruption suffered by such constructs had been absolute in her experience. They were slaves to darkness. "We were trying to secure a find," Scallion 6-1 told her. "A real prize. A Castellan-class battle automata. Pretty beaten up, but in one piece, and without a hint of corruption." "What happened?"
"Gordicor's shock troops swooped in on a pass," 44 Torque said. "We ran for our lives, and hid, obviously. Except when the cyborgs deployed, they didn't seem interested in sweeping the area for us at all. It seems like they were looking for the unit too."
"The Castellan?" Lennox said. "They took our find," Scallion 6-1 said with obvious regret. 44 Torque shrugged.
"We hid here for a while, and before we know it, they're firing on one another."
As his words trailed off, the sound of gunfire faded, and the scavenger fell silent. The battle was apparently over. Lennox heard the trudge of footsteps up behind. It was Omnex 70.
"They're all dead,"
he told the princeps with confidence.
"Come and see."
He led the way through the wreckage of the shattered solar collectors. 44 Torque and Scallion 6-1 scrambled over to their find, where Engine Seer Zarko joined them. While Lank 4 of 12 and Lennox walked slowly through the carnage, Omnex 70 moved from body to heavily armored body, checking that the Thalaxi were truly dead. Such cyborg warriors were known for their resilience. The Castellan lay immobile in the red dust. It looked wholly unremarkable, and Lennox paid it no further mind. "Report," she said after Omnex 70 had returned from the crash site.
"Confirmed. All dead. For attacking their own allies, they were thorough."
"That doesn't make any sense," Lennox muttered.
"That's not all," Omnex 70 said. "These aren't the only bodies. Look here and here. Skitari Forge Guard out of Vertex Australis."
"They're a long way from their forge," the princeps said.
"While some of the Skitari have been blasted apart," the ranger said, "some of the kill shots are galvanic."
"You're saying some of them turned on their own, like the Thalaxi?"
"Not just that," Omnex 70 informed her. "This body exhibits the kind of corruption associated with scrap code infection, as does this. But this one does not, nor this one. If we had come across this Skitari or that cyborg before they were destroyed, we would probably have tried to recruit them."
"Fascinating," Lennox said in a tone that suggested anything but. "Perhaps Gordicor is becoming more subtle in his methods. Engineer, what do we have on the Castellan?
These markings, Zarko told her. First Maniple, Daedari Reserve Cohort. The barrel on the shoulder-mounted bolt cannon has burnt out, and the Maxims on its arms are empty. Shielding and automotives are down. Probably a drained reactor.
Wait. What? Lennox demanded. She and Lenk 4 of 12 were already giving the thing a wide berth. When the Engineer suddenly got up and backed away, the Princeps tensed. Is it polluted? Zarko didn't answer at first. He stared down at the hulking robot before moving back in to check its cranial housing.
I'm not detecting any evidence of corruption, the Engineer told her.
With the plating and visor optics removed, he peered inside the workings of the battle automata's head.
But I'm also not finding any evidence of a bioplastic cerebra or doctrina wafers.
No wetware? Lennox asked.
Or operational hardware.
But looking at the evidence,
Omnex 70 said,
this unit was responsible for the deaths of at least some of the Forge Guard. The Thalaxi also.
It might have something to do with this,
Zarko said, pointing at an object at the center of the Castellan's chest with his axe, seeming not to want to get too close. It was an intricate orb of polyhedral cogs and interlocking gears. The Byzantine arrangement became smaller and more complex the deeper they stared into its disturbing depths. Lenk 4 of 12 came up behind Lennox, transfixed by the thing. As he peered around her shoulder, the Princeps shrugged the menial off with annoyance. What is it? Lennox asked.
I don't know, Zarko told her honestly.
Enough, the Princeps said. I don't want to be out here when the next cohort of Dark Mechanicum troops arrive looking for their fallen comrades. We're leaving.
What about the Castellan?
44 Torque asked. Despite the alien thing embedded in the center of the battle automata's chest, the scavenger was eager to bring back his find. I leave that assessment to the Engineer, Lennox said.
Zarko considered. It is a rare and valuable find, he decided. Whether we refit the unit or use it for parts, the reclamation is worth the risk.
Fine, Lennox said. Then when we get back to Invalis, it can go into quarantine with this miserable specimen. As the Princeps pushed past Lenk 4 of 12 and marched back towards the Archimedex, the Forge laborer looked back and forth between Lennox and the battle automata. What does she mean, quarantine?